Let's go with James in North Carolina. James, this says that you thought of a criteria that would prove God if it could be done. I'm intrigued, James. What's going on?
Hey, I'm really glad to be talking to you guys. Thanks for taking my call. I didn't expect to get on.
See how long that lasts.
All right. So firstly, firstly, I'm an atheist, so I'm definitely not I'm not saying I have proof of God. The reason I'm calling is because a lot of people call in with proof for God, or they ask you what you think would prove God, and the answer is usually, I don't know, and it's really, really hard to figure out a way to know. And I thought of a criteria, at least one that would more or less work for me. So I just wanted to run it by you guys to see what you think. If it's full of holes,
drop it on the table, man. Let's see what you're working with.
All right. So I've determined, for me at least, one good way for God to show himself is I've determined I need three things. All three things, or else it doesn't work. The first thing is that I would need to actually have a conversation with God. And that's while I'm lucid. So like not in a dream, not while I'm drunk, not while I'm depressed or anything like that. It has to be an actual conversation. No, like magic 8-ball Bible stuff. He has to actually talk to me himself.
Let me interject really quick. I know you're laying out all three here, but I just want to say at the outset, my first response is going, how could you possibly know if the experience that you're having is in fact talking to a God? I mean, there are plenty of people who, while thinking of themselves as being in a completely lucid state, have experiences that they attribute to all different kinds of gods. I've talked to people who say they've been abducted by aliens, people who believe they're communicating with the dead. And they would all say they were perfectly lucid at the time. So with the first thing that you put on the table, I'm already going, well, how would you go about determining that you were actually even having that experience?
Well, a lot of it is I would need, that's why I said I would need kind of all three things together. The first thing, the reason I mentioned that is because, like, in order for me to take it with any sort of significance, it would have to be while I'm lucid, is basically what I was saying. So in order for me to actually think of it as something special and not just, oh, I'm drunk or oh, I'm dreaming, it would have to, I'd have to be in that state of mind is what I was trying to establish there.
I want to get to your other two criteria, definitely, but I also don't know how you can know that you're lucid.
Yeah.
I have no idea how so if I were to begin listing criteria, having a conversation with God, apart from the fact that you're talking about a being who might be capable of demonstrating to you that you are in a conversation with God. Okay. What are the other two?
So the other thing is I would need, basically confirmation that I experienced what I experienced. So I would need other people who also had the exact same experience, saw the exact same thing I saw, heard the same voice saying roughly the same things, as close to exact as possible. That way I wouldn't write it off as just a one-off mental trip that I had that was unique to my mind. So I need some sort of confirmation outside.
Independent confirmation, yes. Okay. What's the third one?
Yeah. The third one, and probably the biggest one, is I would need something outside of that experience that would actually prove that it was God, or at least something powerful. So I need something unexplainable by science. So it would need to give me like an apple that regenerates itself when you bite into it, or a snowball that never melts. Something that I could have. Something I could have outside of that experience to confirm it. Maybe something that I could give to, say, scientists to have them study to, get.
Unexplainable is a word that always throws me, because I don't know how we could ever really make the jump from unexplained to unexplainable. You know what I mean? When we're talking about the realm of science, we're talking about things that we can test and demonstrate to be true and repeat and all these things. I mean, there's a lot of stuff over, throughout history that people have thought of as unexplainable, but science just wasn't there yet. And now we have explanations for those things. So Yeah, there's a lot of little things with what you're saying where I'm going, okay, but I just don't know how we could get to where you're talking about needing to be. And independently of all of that, what you're talking about seems to be leading toward ways that you could be convinced that you had an experience, and then attributing that to a god or something supernatural. But I don't know how that would, prove it to other people either. There'd be further steps.
I have mountains of problems, not the least of which is that we didn't begin by actually start by defining a god. But if we take your criteria, your three-pronged thing, one of them is a conversation with God, which that alone could prove it, provided that it's actually a God who could then provide the demonstrations. Number two is confirmation from others that they experienced and saw the same thing. And the third one is that you need and literally you said need something outside of that would prove. Well, that's the whole ball game. If you can't tell me exactly what it is that would actually prove it, then all you're saying is you're building up step one, step two, and then the proof. But here's the thing. If you were in the late 19th, early 20th century and you went to a seance, you would have been in conversation with something that purported to be a spirit. Other people outside of you would have been sitting at the same table or in the same room, and they would confirm that, yes, that conversation experience happened, and they would have been able to produce phenomenon that you would not have been able to explain, including ectoplasm and stuff. So your own criteria would have had you believing that you were talking to spirits when you absolutely were not. I don't see how your criteria gets you anywhere near demonstrating that a God exists or that you've interacted with a God.
And yeah, Matt's got me thinking about the whole Arthur Conan Doyle and the Doyle's fallacy thing. Because, I mean, there's plenty of people who are otherwise intelligent people who get taken in by, falsehoods. They make the leap to believing stuff without having sufficient evidence to justify that, because they make this mistake of thinking, well, I've already eliminated all of the explanations that are out there, so it must be this other thing. But that's a mistake. That's a trap cognitively.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. I guess part of it is I didn't really define God before I started. I guess my definition for a God would be, I suppose, a being that is capable of mass creation. I guess, able to create planets, life, whatever. By itself. But I don't necessarily think it would be, all powerful or all knowing. I don't really see how.
So the problem, James, is so now you're in a position where you're defining God, but you're now claiming what it is that you're seeking to find. But what if God isn't the way you define? What if there's a God that does not match your definition? It's like saying, I'm going to go look for a missing particle that explains everything. And I'm going to define that particle with properties A, B, C, and D. And whoops, we didn't find it. But what if your definition is incorrect? So this is why when people call into the shows and why I have debates and discussions, they say, oh, what's your definition of God, Matt? I don't have one. I have many. I have as many definitions of God as there are people who have proposed them. What I want to know is, for the person who says that a God exists, they are the ones who get to declare the definition of God. And then based on that definition, we can then begin to examine whether or not they are offering up a definition of a God that is consistent with reality or not. It does mean, like, I could define God as a married bachelor. Ta-da! I just demonstrated there can't be any gods ever. Woo! So my definition of God doesn't matter. I have to deal with the God that is being defined by the person I'm talking to. And if you don't believe in a God, then all you can do is say, okay, I'm going to go look for maybe this person's definition, and I'd just rather they do the work. So I don't think you've got good criteria for determining whether or not a God exists. And honestly, not to bag on you, James, but it doesn't matter what your definition of God is. And the second you as an atheist say, this is the God I'm looking for, then any theist out there could say, oh, well, there's your problem. You went and defined God wrong.
Yeah. And you're playing the exact same game that a lot of them are playing. The theists that are out there, they'll say, okay, I define God as this set of things. So if I have an experience that fits my idea of what that entity could provide me, and I don't have any other explanation for it, and other people have experiences that they attribute to the same thing, well, voila, we've proven God. But yeah, it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I think kind of part of the reason I kind of leaned into that flaw is because I used to be a Christian, so the only God that I have any kind of reference point for, I guess, would be Yahweh. And I'm trying to the thing with me saying, you know, the whole criteria for proving God is I'm open if these things ever were to happen. You know, I wouldn't assume the type of God it is. I can't say for sure all these things happened and oh, it's Yahweh, or oh, it's Allah, or oh, it's Vishnu, but it would definitely, if it were to happen to me in that way, I think it would make me strongly consider the possibility a bit more. Because right now I'm not saying I'm convinced that there is no God, but I'm leaning more towards I think the odds are stronger that there isn't a God than that there is.
Well, I think that you might be making a very common mistake. I had an interaction about 1.5 years ago with a guy who asked me what would happen to me if I had like a Damascus Road type of experience where like I had a vision and it's like God appeared to me. What would I do? And I said, I'd get an MRI like immediately and I'd go talk to mental health professionals. And this guy freaked out. He was like, I can't believe you're being that skeptical. Wouldn't you, you know, because from his perspective, he's going, well, I can confidently attribute experience to cause without having to do any of the work of actually connecting those things with any sort of evidence. We're all so desperate. I should say most of us are so desperate to feel like we've got explanations for things when we don't. So it seems to me that what you may be doing is leaning into that, going, okay, well, if I have a set of experiences, then I can attribute it to this thing and have an answer. But I think that that's a mistake. I think the time to believe stuff is when you've got evidence linking the effect to the cause. And anything beyond that is I think a trap. It's a way to, because we're, as human beings, we want to see patterns. We want to feel like we know what's going on. We're very, very quick to jump to conclusions about things. And it's just a really good way to be wrong about stuff.
One of the things is that when you started, after we got to some clarification and let's define things, if you say, oh, I was a Christian, so I can only talk about Yahweh. Well, how many different versions and ideas and concepts of Yahweh are there? I mean, I was a Southern Baptist. I had friends who were Presbyterians, Methodists, Catholics, and none of us had exactly the same notion about God. Now, there is, I will grant you, within philosophy, this God of classical theism that is at least maximally powerful, and et cetera. And you'd probably be okay kind of assuming or saying, hey, I'm going to talk about the God of classical theism because if we could demonstrate that God existed, that would be a good pointer towards further clarifying which God exists. And if we show that somehow the God of classical theism doesn't exist or can't exist, well, that means we've eliminated all God concepts that are derived from that. So anything that would include that, like if you just picked one characteristic, like all powerful, having all power that could be, if you could show that wasn't true, then every God that includes all powerful as a characteristic with that same definition of all powerful clearly also isn't real. But yeah, even just trying to go, oh, we're talking about Yahweh. Well, who the hell's Yahweh? Which Yahweh you're talking about? The one my grandmother believed in, the one I believed in, the one the people at the Pentecostal church down the road believed in? It's not easy. And that's why I just avoid it and say, hey, tell me what you believe and why.
Yeah. I hope that helped a little bit. James, speaking of what people believe and why, we're going to move on to some theist callers. But have a great rest of your Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you guys talking to me. You gave me a lot to think about.
Thanks for the call.